because that's what coherence is. It's a unifying principle of unification. So when the superconductor introduced, then all particles create strong waves and fire in the same direction. So these waves are measurable. And so it is from that point of view we speak of coherence.
We had a talk this morning in the circle, and one of the things that came up and was a question for me is about coherence. Because we talk about it, and Dattatreya was also implying, well, we are midweek now, and we're not yet in coherence. For me personally, that gives a feeling as if I have to go into coherence. So this is not a voluntary, completely involuntary something. Already something is put into me to go with the group. So how does this, it's a small, thin line. I can stay within myself, but also I owe coherence. And for me, my inclination is to coherence because I'm a producer. Sound is my thing. But on the other hand, that what needs to be played out. But if you talk about coherence, it will also, it's a seed. Oh, I have to be in coherence, or my voice has to be like this. And especially because it is voicing what primarily comes up here. It's not really a very violent, energetic bodily movements, but mostly it's the voice. So already you come into, my sound has to be in tune. And this is, for me, not completely a free, voluntary expression. Mm-hmm. So for me, the question is, I understand to go into coherence. For me, that's that's what I'm searching for if I'm playing with sound. But it's not necessarily being angelic or like a choir, that everything is exactly in place, because some of the sounds are not really in coherence, but do their thing to get in that coherence. So for me, Dattatreya gave already a quite good talk about it, but I really like to hear your perspective on it and what the goal is, or it is not a goal.
Well, first of all, it would be good to clarify what the term coherence here truly applies and why, and also to reconfirm that this work, this kind of work, is all based on, even if speaking in terms of its references in scriptures, in agamas and shastras, and how it has been elucidated, is based on the understanding of what could be summarized as, and what is in turn based upon what we've discussed earlier, that concealing aspect and that revealing aspect. So that concealing aspect is a power in its own right. So it's not just some kind of veil one can just tore asunder. It's the power which can only be overcome by equally powerful power. So therefore, this is a very clear understanding, even if it's understanding in terms of the cosmology of how Trika Shaivism here speaks of the entire setup. Because we can also, just as a side note, take this with a pinch of salt, or even be open to polemics, or even dismiss this on the account of, well, as with all systems, they are all based on thought, and therefore they are only a pale replica or analogy of reality. All this is consistent with an argument. However, if we are to take that the system that has survived quite a long time in terms of its application, if for a moment we presuppose that indeed there is something to it, that it is somehow reflects, even if in conceptual matter or conceptual manner, what it represents, then the concept of human effort is a misnomer. It's a misunderstanding. And yet, there is still an avopaya, right? There is still individually tailored means. But that being said, and I think this maybe your question invites this little announcement of potential ways how the coming discourses can be also touching that. The importance that is given in Trika Shaivism on Shaktipat and or Anugraha. So Shaktipat and Anugraha could be spoken of interchangeably. Shaktipat is simply translated as the descent of power, and Anugraha is simply translated as grace. Just that, grace. Anugraha. It's like the one who is, the Anugraha is that power that bestows one with grace. So the whole system of work and as much as the monistic system of Shaivites is highly sophisticated, but of course it's very easy to oversimplify it, because there is also attempts have been made all the time, and or to live without any concrete what am I to do. Particularly if one reads Abhinavagupta, which is the highest achievement of, let's say, Trika Shaiva thought, with his, we could say, emphatic insistence on direct path. He was the promulgator and promoter and a spokesperson for direct path. His was the pratyabhijna emphasis. So he was not to, let's say, give that much of his time and attention to what is expounded in a system of krama, literally sequential path of unfoldment, or even Spanda, which sees the whole thing in a different way, as his disciple Ksemaraja would really, really give the beautiful glosses on the Spanda Karika scripture. Nor the similar to Krama system of Kaula or Kula. No, Abhinavagupta was all about get the job done now. And of course, his work is to the highest, I would say, sadhaka, to the one who is really, really done their job. And only when the job is done, then you can enjoy these fruits truly, savor them for what they are. With that being said, he lays out some foundational ground of understanding of the involuntary principles upon which the entire Trika Shaiva system is based. It is emphasizing that the only power that is capable of overthrowing that what we spoke of earlier today as concealing power of Shiva, Shiva's revealing power. So Shiva's revealing power can be gained only through three means, or three ways, rather. When Shiva, as it were, himself bestows that. So this is spoken of as direct descent of grace from Shiva himself. It's spoken at length, scrutinized, given gloss, and expounding discourses on that. Then comes Shaktipat received from a qualified guru. This is tradition very clear about, you see? And the third one is when that Shaktipat one is born with, you see? So there's no other way that this, how it could work. The system itself, philosophical system, doesn't leave much room for speculation. So therefore, between these, the dance. So this is also understood to be that one's effort required at the level of individual means is to be always open to the descent of that grace. So in other words, that's what I meant. One has to raise one's head above the waters, these otherwise cosmic waters of existence, so that being noticed. So this is why we overrode or overrun the previously more kind of like so-called pleasing, crowd-pleasing slogans. Everyone is deserving of grace, and I am also guilty as charged. Because I used to say this. Because it's crowd-pleasing. Because it sends this message of equality and everything, and that's what we want to hear, is it not? We all want to feel that, well, sorry, I didn't do much work, anything, I just happened to be here, maybe even on the first night, like somewhere in California, where spiritual teachers like, what's late Sally Kempton said, you have to be careful because you go to the supermarket, you can run into one or two easily, or two or three. What do you say to these people? To these people, to encourage them, you say everyone is worthy, as worthy. But within more kind of hermeneutic setting of the tradition, it's inconsistent with the understanding how it works. And there is no such thing as kind of outer other powers because it's inconsistent with how we understand what the first five tattvas represent here. So if the tattva corresponding, or rather this tattvic unfoldment, corresponding to the power of concealing its own essence, then that's up to a boss. It's up to the boss, and she is in charge, because Shakti is in charge there. What kind of power is there that can override Shakti's power, which is Shiva's power, to conceal Shiva's essence from his own self for his own sport? Tradition is very clear about that. So therefore, it has this clarity of understanding that all there is grace. All there is grace. Yes, there is this first upaya. Yes, there is this school. You check in, you go there, you do your job. It's just like train, doesn't matter. You've got to train, you've got to do it. It's like, it's inconceivable for a lot of Western mind because this is the widespread popularity of Neo-advaita and non-duality. Because the message that you are free, walk out of this room. There's no such thing as job. It's just, I've done so many critical talks from this angle, from that angle, from an angle of acknowledging its value and its incentive and its kind of maybe sentiment that it carries, to penetrating critique of its shallow grounds, to scriptural inconsistency, to inconsistency in terms of how it translates by the time it translates from the soil where these teachings have sprouted from, when they're transmitted into the Western soil. And it just, we reach to the point now when I've realized it's a waste of time. It's best to give people knowledge, to see for themselves, to see how it works. Hence, this immersion's emphasis on tattvas, because this clearly shows, hopefully it shows how everything sits there. And as we will progress in our discourses further, hopefully it will somehow become clear why that is, and why being aware of being aware will not fly. It will not suffice. So going back to the emphasis on anugraha as the most important thing is based precisely on that fact that the only power that can overrun the power of concealment is the power that has to be the power of Shiva, the self-revealing power. And that power is what bestows grace upon anyone. And then, of course, how fortunate one is. How fortunate one is to receive Shaktipat either directly from Shiva as the bearer of these words now, or through a qualified teacher. Acharya, preferably someone who has the status, what this very, very difficult, problematic, and controversial term stands for, guru. So this, therefore, confirms that there is no such thing as we do this trick, we do that, we do this, we do that, and we can outsmart. No. This, therefore, work has its own unfoldment. The unfoldment here is based on involuntary nature. It's like surfing, in a way. It's like surfing. Surfer cannot do anything with an ocean. He can only go with the waves. And the greatest surfers realize that. And like fighting with the wave is the last thing one wants, unless it's just a little swell there that's going to just make one feel with sand and foam in all the places. The big waves, you don't fight with them. There's no way to. So these also to clarify. Then with regard to coherence, as much as I appreciate, and it is very, very accurate and comparable and applicable to speak of the coherence in terms of sound in this particular container in our work. However, by coherence, we understand here the brain wave coherence. The coherence also perhaps brain wave, maybe just slightly reductionistic, the overall coherence. The coherence which, let's say, in the transcendental meditation movement has been spoken perhaps the most, with the analogy as an example given of the Meissner conductor. When an ordinary conductor fires, the particles fire in different direction, but the superconductor creates the possibility for the particles firing in the same direction, and that's what creates waves of coherence, these waves of coherence that are measurable. And during these waves of coherence, all this is now being further spilled into the manifest plane of existence in terms of increase in positivity and decrease in negativity. As simple as that. There are studies, we can share these studies, we should share these studies. There are videos we have published over the years where we made sure we include these links to the studies whenever I mentioned and spoke about the effect of coherence. So there is even a way of saying that, again, very prevalent, it used to be very prevalent in the transcendental meditation movement, as what happens in the world when coherence diminishes. And the explanations are, effectively speaking, there's a breakdown of all forms of communication. There's a breakdown in spontaneous behavior to uphold natural law. In other words, we all become crooked each in our own ways. And that individual crookedness multiplies into tribe, society, order. And on a national scale, that's what leads effectively to cataclysmic events, wars, major conflicts. Of course, the critics of that have been saying that, well, the humankind have been at war for thousands of years, and seems that there are no period in history of us earthlings when we were not at war at some point, somewhere, with someone, between some kind of groups of people. It is at once true and untrue, because there were periods in history which were characterized by considerable peace, considerable ways of living together compared to our time. They were. But somehow, maybe the emphasis is being made on the war. Maybe emphasis is being made on, we pick up the evolutionary unfoldment in history by examining each conflict, each war, each uprisal, each revolution, each change of society. And that gives us an idea that we are these crooked beasts constantly fighting at each other's throat. No, I don't buy that perspective. What I'd rather speak to, not perhaps right now, because it will, I think, deserve to be given a real substantial time, to the importance of where we've started our program with regard to that abhasa, that what in the flesh is being perceived beyond the level of perception. There are no faculties yet, there's nothing. It's just perceived in that purnata, in the fullness of Shiva Shakti's embrace. Something is flashed in awareness. And that whatever is flashed is then has the capacity to being brought forth into existence. The same principle is always at work here and now. So in other words, we are constantly walking that slim, slender line of how the world is based on what is being molded into reality, perhaps out of that sum total of this, what here, a replica of that original abhasa. So in other words, there is everything available to consciousness, everything available. There's no, it's unlimited availability of various different ways and forms, absolutely unlimited, as exemplified by the first Shuddha Tattvas, right? And that is what here gives it this formidable quality, because it means that everything is possible within awareness. And somehow, perhaps, this is not necessarily now following in clear footsteps of a traditional discourse, that on the way of the collapse of tattvas in the process of their unfoldment, because it's very important and become even more important to see that this cascading of the unfoldment of tattvas is a collapse of each tattva into its unfolding tattva. So this, from 1 to 36, there is this cascading awareness that is then present itself as this. And within that, there is a possibility that not only that power of concealment conceals Shiva's essence, but it makes it a really unconscious God. It makes God unconscious. And the consciousness is being brought back with the possibility of here, Nara. So this is an outrageous, blasphemous, in a way, interpretation, which is also irresistible to look at, because even though Nara here is Shiva in disguise, cloaked in all the kanchukas, right, under the spell of Maya, it is still Shiva. And where the process of involution begins. And in that process of involution, it's as if God becomes conscious again. It's a very, very anthropomorphic, not just geocentric, it's a homocentric idea. It's the idea of anthropomorphic Purusha, Adam Kadman. So in other words, human being here is not a freak of nature, not just yet another one, or just as intelligent, maybe more than dolphins, another colony of people who happen to take Earth over. It's like, no, these are all mismatch, potpourri of whatever happened with the collapse of some more coherent esoteric systems, with the science looming on us. But science fails to become religion except of its dogma. It fails to provide a coherent picture. This is the greatest regret of someone like Albert Einstein, who was literally losing sleep, literally, over his thoughts on theory of everything. He thought he's that close to the theory of everything. I don't know if you folks heard that, but this is what Einstein was really, really bugged by. Because he thought that, and you cannot blame him, the breakthrough in science that happened within just a couple of decades was, we're catching up with this. You watched Oppenheimer, right? Okay, so some of you watched Oppenheimer. You watched this. This is all based on what happened in the, in those 30s. So much happened in the 30s, such a peculiar decade. And this biggest breakthrough, this is the birth of true quantum mechanics, quantum physics, the possibility of splitting atom, the possibility of creating completely something which prior to that was purely conceptual, was not even considered possible until it becomes so. That this is the freak of quantum science. In this room, I gave the overview which we published with an example from the Oppenheimer, that creation of the atomic bomb, to this day, unless I'm uninformed and I would like to be corrected, I would love to be corrected on that. The creation of the atomic bomb is one of the only examples when the true knowledge of quantum physics was actually used in terms of materialized into something tangible. Whatever they've done in CERN or try to do, where we don't hear about it anymore. But atomic bomb was created and was tried, and was tried by superpowers on a monthly basis. There were thousands of tests, nuclear tests conducted by Soviet Union and the United States, later joined by England, India, Australia, right? So France, yeah, so it's a fact. So the implications of that, and Albert Einstein felt that he is very close to the theory of everything, because the theory of everything would have rehabilitated science to a really new way of, like not just science is a particular subset of ideas that create the picture of reality and gives us access to the fundamental laws of nature, as some of its laws clearly do. But it is also agreed upon that It's still a system, conceptual framework. So the theory of everything would have done that, but it was not possible. There is no theory of everything. So it's a kind of like science came head on with observed phenomena, and some scientists with whom I shared just casual conversations during mealtimes in the United States during our days when we traveled there, like Menas Kafatas said, it's the end of science, because the true science, yes, of course, there'll always be science directed at some kind of utilizing its knowledge for perfecting further technology. That is unstoppable. But science, in the sense of its final frontiers, came to the point where it is now cannot go further, because observer observed here dynamics make the true measure of observation impossible, because observer influences the observed. So circle closed. So anyway, going back to now, as we have departed slightly, to coherence, that one can dismiss this as a spiritual mambo-jumbo, as some people do, but it is also tempting to take this as a possibility that what we're witnessing now in the world, outside of, let's say, Anunnaki race and lizards, and, right, or people simply who lost it totally, what is it all about, right, and the greed, and that there is indeed this possibility for psychological diseases, illnesses on the global level as a result of the lack of coherence, because every particle fires in different direction, and there's a lack of shared consensus in terms of that what unifies us, because that's what coherence is. It's a unifying principle of unification. So when the superconductor introduced, then all particles create strong waves and fire in the same direction. So these waves are measurable. And so it is from that point of view we speak of coherence. So you are correct to suggest that it doesn't have to manifest itself only as angelic sounds. When I speak about it in relation to sounds through vocalizations and harmonizations, to me it's the underlying harmonies within the sounds and their complexities, rather than just a sheer, let's say, pleasing to an ear melody. So we, as a musician and any other musicians in the room, you know very well that some musical compositions, if you hear them for the first time from another culture, will make it difficult for you to comprehend. You start, let's not go far. People don't consider music Indian ragas. Japanese music is very off-putting if you don't know it, right? You have to be tuned to music from where I was born. It will, I will share with you the diva, born once every 100 years, Munajat Yulchieva. I've met her. She's considered to be, this fragile body. This voice comes out of her, and she sings these devotional songs of Sufi. There are this kind of Arabic way of singing, the three throat sounds. And the lowest one is like, this deep, at the top of its voice, with a sonorous kind of thickness to that sound. I don't think many people will actually put it instead of Sade at the pool time, So with all the love and respect for Sade, who's a beautiful voice, but this, it's like, yes, we all love, in a way, as a musician, you know that. And I'm also an amateur who simply, I'm a lover of music. and has always been open to various influences throughout my life, and like being introduced to the very new, different music, and what's interesting is that there is a popularization of how some traditional forms of music are then, let's say, utilized for the sake of, for commercial sake, for the sake of its being more palatable. So we hear that kind of North African Arabic tunes, Indian tunes, like in Bollywood music. Bollywood music has nothing to do with traditional Indian music whatsoever. In fact, it's much more Western than Indian, right? But it goes very well with an Indian outing, with the curry, right? And papadam, and if you are in, So that's to the coherence in terms of, so it's not the coherence of the actual sound. So you are correct to say that it can be sounds that come and almost feel in slight contrast, but they also are additional harmonies. They're spoken in music as additional harmonies to juxtapose it. If in the music, it's all in scales as well. It depends on, like particularly with the science of raga, the dominant scale there sets the tone. So I hope this kind of I hope this clarifies. Thank you, Peter.